Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Separating from Loggers Employment. My name is Elizabeth Altoff and I'm a Public Relations Specialist here at Missouri Loggers. And we're going to spend the next 30 to 40 minutes talking about a topic that is probably one of the less common topics we tend to think about when we're talking about our loggers benefits. But it is one that will affect all of us at one point or another. And that is, what are my options with my loggers benefit when I'm no longer in a loggers covered position? So there are many reasons that an employee may separate from loggers employment throughout their career. I think we tend to think the most common one would be retirement. You work your whole career and you reach retirement and then you stop working, and that makes a lot of sense. But there are many other reasons an employee may throughout their career separate from loggers covered employment. Maybe they took a different job, laid off or fired. I know my husband and I, when we started our family here a few years ago, we had the conversation of whether or not I should stay home and take care of our family. So regardless of the circumstances in which you're separating from loggers covered employment, whether it's at retirement or prior to your retirement age, it's important that you know what your options are for your loggers benefit. So the question when you separate from employment is, what are my options when I leave my job? Now, I spend a lot of time traveling all over the state, talking to members and employers, and this topic really does seem to be one that there are a lot of common misconceptions about. And here are just a couple of things that I hear commonly that are misconceptions about what happens with my benefit when I leave employment. The first one is, you must work until retirement age to qualify for a monthly benefit. Not only is this not true, there are plenty of options potentially that a member may have prior to retirement for handling their benefit when they leave. So we're going to talk about all the options that a member does have, not only at retirement but also prior to retirement as well. Here's another one. If you quit your job and are not vested with loggers, you must take a refund of your member contributions. Again, this isn't true, and there are actually many reasons why a member may want to leave their contributions in the system. So, sometimes we find that when an employee separates from retirement, their employer just hands them the refund paperwork and they just assume that that's the only choice they have. So we're going to kind of talk about this one as well. So the fact of the matter is that there are more than one options that are available for your benefit. A lot of it does depend on the circumstances as far as the timing of when you do separate. And so we're going to talk about how some of these different things work. And here are just a few of the ones that we're going to talk about today in more detail. Before we kind of get started here talking about all these different options, at any time if you do have a question, feel free to use your GoToMeeting toolbox to type those questions. You can chat them directly to me. I will do my best as the questions come in to kind of address them as we go along if they apply to the whole group. If it's something more individual, I may follow up with you after the presentation as well. So feel free to use that at any time. I will also mention before we get started here any further that this presentation will be available as a recorded version online following the presentation as well. Okay, so like I kind of mentioned earlier, the options that a member does have when they leave are going to really depend on a couple factors at their point of termination. We're going to ask ourselves as we go through some of these scenarios two questions. What is the member's age and how much service credit they have? So a member works throughout their career in loggers to earn service credit towards their benefit, and they're working towards a retirement age. So a couple things to keep in mind about service credit and that retirement age that are going to be important to us as we talk about these different options is, number one, when we look at a member when they've separated, we're going to ask ourselves whether or not they're vested. And just as a reminder, vesting means you have 60 months of service credits in the LAGERS system. Just because you're not vested doesn't mean you don't have any options, but this is one thing that we do have to look at, and it does determine what all our different options are. The second thing we're going to look at is the individual's age. Now, for LAGERS purposes, normal retirement age, just as a reminder, is going to be 60 for general employees and police and fire. Now, each individual employee can elect to take a reduced benefit and retire up to 5 years early of their normal age, so that would be 55 for general and 50 for police and fire. So these are the retirement ages, and we're going to kind of refer back to these. So I just wanted to remind everybody of what those are for LAGERS. Now, some of you on the line with me today, I know, do have the rule of 80, so you may have a different retirement age from one of these. So those folks that have that rule of 80, you know who you are, and just keep that in mind when we're talking about retirement ages, that you may have a different age that does apply to you. Okay, so as we go through these scenarios, the service credit and the retirement age are the two things that we're going to look at. So let's say that we have an employee who's working in the LAGERS system, earning their service credit, and at some point they separate from employment. They've stopped working, and at that particular point in time, they have 4 years of service credit. Okay, so the first question we're going to ask ourselves is this individual vested? The answer is no, they don't have 5 years of service credit, so this is a non-vested member. Non-vested members who are not are going to have two options when they reach this point where they've separated from employment. Their first option would be, kind of like we were talking about earlier, would be to take that refund of contributions. Not every member pays into the LAGERS system, so not everybody are going to have contributions that they can take a refund. But if you are an individual that's paid in your 4% and you separate from employment and you're not vested, this is one option, is to take that refund. And I will mention, if that is an option that you are looking at, there's two ways to apply for that. You can apply online through My LAGERS, which I'm going to show you here in a little bit how to get to that. Or you can also fill out our form, which is available on our website, which is the LRS 3 form. So you've got a couple different ways that you can apply for that benefit. And typically those refunds take 60 to 90 days to process here in our office, so don't let that be a surprise to anybody who is applying for that. Again, the second option would be to leave your contributions in the system. And somebody who's not vested, so they're not eligible for a monthly benefit at retirement, may think, well, why on earth would I do that? But there's a very good reason that we're going to talk about here in just a second, why you may actually want to leave those contributions in the system. Now again, if you don't have any contributions in the system, you don't have a whole lot of options at this point, but that service credit, and in this case this 4 years of service credits, may actually be a benefit to you down the road. So we're going to talk about that here in a second. And I just did have a question that came in that asks, well, what happens to the contributions that the employer is making on behalf of that employee? And what happens to those contributions? The 4% that the employee contributes goes into an account with their name on it. It earns interest, and the refund is based only on that 4% plus the interest that the employees are contributing in. Everything else that the employer has contributed in on their behalf stays with the employer's assets. And we're going to kind of talk about, there may still be a benefit payable down the road on that service credit, or maybe not. But the money that the employer stays in is going to stay in the employer's account. It's not something that the employee gets to draw out when they leave. So that's a great question. Now, one thing I do always caution folks about who are talking about taking a refund of their contributions is that when you take that refund, you are going to forfeit the service credit standing to your account. So in the example that we just looked at, the individual that had 4 years of service credit, if they applied for a refund, they would be forfeiting that 4 years that they've earned in loggers, okay? Because that 4% is helping to pay for those 4 years, and if you take it out, the benefit goes with it. Which kind of leads us into why a member may actually want to leave their contributions in the system. So we're back to this example of the individual who worked for 4 years and then stopped working for their employer. Now, if this particular employee decided to leave their contributions in the system, or maybe they were non-contributory from the beginning, so there was nothing to take a refund of to start with, let's say this individual reemploys within the Logers system somewhere. It doesn't have to be with the same employer. Logers has 660 some employers across the state. You could reemploy with any one of those employers as long as you do this within 10 years. We do require that the reemployment happen within that 10-year window. But if you do, let's say in this example, this individual reemploys somewhere else within the state for a Logers employer, and they work just one more year. That's all, 1 year. Now between the 2 stints of Logers covered employment, they have a total of 5 years worth of service credit in the system. So this changes the options altogether because this member is now vested, okay? So let's say this individual gets their 5 years in and then they terminate Logers covered employment again. So we're going to ask ourselves the 2 questions. Number 1, again, are they vested? And so yes, we've established this individual is now vested in the system. And number 2, we ask what their retirement age is. So let's assume that this individual is still quite a ways from retirement. These are the 3 options that this individual may have. The first one, again, is going to be a refund, and that refund is still talking about those contributions. Same thing applies. If you take that refund of contributions, you're forfeiting the service credit. So if this individual had taken a refund off this first 4 years, when they would have started over again, they would have started with 0 service credit. And so they wouldn't have been vested after this 1 year. So just keep that in mind with those refunds. The second option is what we would call a deferred retirement. And all a deferred retirement is it says, yes, I'm vested in the Logers system. I am guaranteed by law to have a monthly benefit payable to me when I retire, but I'm not yet age eligible to start drawing it. So all that says is I'm going to wait, and when I'm age eligible, I'm going to draw for my retirement. Now, if this is something that you're looking to do, we do have an application that you can complete to apply for deferred retirement. And the benefit of applying for that is that it allows us to keep track of you over the years. Our communication with our members primarily happens through the employer, and if you no longer have an employer for us to communicate through, if we don't have an up-to-date address or email address or anything like that, it makes it very difficult for us to keep up with you. So that's why there is a benefit to applying for that deferred retirement. The third option that a member may have, and actually I'm going to back up really quickly. I did just want to mention also on the deferred retirements, if you are an employee who works for an employer that has an LT program, a life and temporary program, I did want to mention, just so there's no surprises to anybody, that temporary benefits are not payable on those LT programs under a deferred retirement. So if you leave when you're 40 years old and you apply for your benefit when you're 60, just keep in mind that the benefit will not be calculated to include the temporary portion. You'll still get the life amount payable for life, but that temporary is not going to be payable on that. The same would be true if you are working under the Rule of 80. Once you've deferred your retirement and your age continues to increase, that's not going to help you count towards a Rule of 80 retirement age. So if you're deferring your retirement, you're not going to qualify for a Rule of 80 retirement either. So just keep those 2 things in mind under deferred retirements. Okay, now we'll talk about this third option for, again, a vested member who is younger than retirement age. The lump sum payout is the option that probably is going to affect the smallest group of folks, but it is something that will be available to certain people. And what the lump sum is we basically, instead of receiving a monthly benefit when you retire, we'll calculate whatever the value of your benefit would be at retirement, and we pay it out to you in a lump sum. Now, this lump sum is designed to be a benefit for individuals who don't have a lot of service credit and are a long ways from retirement. So we'll talk about who's eligible for this. To qualify to receive a lump sum payout of your benefit, and this is prior to you being age eligible to retire, you have to have less than 10 years of service and be more than 10 years away from retirement, okay? So you're working through your logger's career. This between 5 and 10 years of service is going to be when you're eligible to take a lump sum. So you would have to separate somewhere in this time to qualify for this lump sum. And again, the reason being is a benefit that's based on 5 or 6 years of service is not going to be much in the form of a monthly benefit. And if you're still 20 or 30 years away from drawing that benefit, it's going to be even less when you get there. So this is an option that some members may be able to use if you find yourself in that position. Again, remember, taking a lump sum payout, loggers views that as we're paying out your retirement benefit in full. If you ever reemploy in the system, you're not going to get service credit for that period of time. And so this is kind of a permanent way of closing your account with loggers and getting the benefit for the service credit that you've earned, okay? Okay, so we've got another individual. Let's look at a couple more scenarios here. Let's say we have an individual who's now got their 5 years in and continues to work up until their early retirement age. So again, early retirement will be 50 for general employees, or 55 for general employees and 50 for police and fire. So let's say you get, and you're within your early retirement age, you're vested, and you just can't take it anymore, you're ready to leave, maybe you've got a different job that you're moving on to. You've got a couple different options again. Your first option would be to delay your retirement. And I know you're thinking, no, wait a second, Elizabeth, you just told us on the last one that you called it a deferred retirement. How is delaying your retirement different from deferring your retirement? It really isn't. The only difference between the two is that delayed retirements happen when you're already age eligible to start drawing your benefits. So if you've reached early retirement age, loggers considers you age eligible to draw a benefit. This is most importantly going to affect those folks who do have those life and temporary plans. Temporary benefits are still payable in a situation if you've reached early retirement age and you're just choosing not to take your benefit, perhaps because you don't want to take the reduction in your monthly benefits. When you do apply for your benefits, in this case because you were already age eligible, you'll still receive those temporary payments. So kind of keep that in mind as well. So delaying your retirement is just saying, you know, I don't want to draw my benefit just yet because there is a reduction for taking my early retirement, and I'd like to wait until I reach normal retirement age to initiate that benefit. So there's one option. The second option would obviously then be just to go ahead and apply for that early retirement. The reduction is 0.5% for every month early that a member retires. So if it comes out to be about 6% a year, or 30% if you were to take the full unreduced benefit. And the thing that I always caution folks about when they're looking at taking an early retirement is that reduction is a permanent reduction. So when you reach your normal retirement age, you're still receiving a reduced benefit. Now you're receiving the benefit for a longer period of time, but it will be permanently reduced. So I always just caution folks when they're planning on how much of their benefits they're willing to take a reduction on, that's kind of something to keep in mind. But let's say this individual decides to continue working and is continuing in the logger system. They're vested, and now they've reached normal retirement age. Once a member reaches normal retirement age, as long as they are no longer working for a logger's employer, they can apply for full benefits at any time. In fact, I run into folks every now and again who have stopped working for loggers, they're vested, they're age eligible, and they've got it worked out for whatever reason that there's a benefit to their loggers benefit by delaying taking it. And there really is, your benefit's not going to get any bigger by waiting. Once you are no longer working and you're age eligible to take it, your benefit's not going to grow anymore at that point. So go ahead and apply for those benefits. And start drawing those full benefits. So that's the option for when you reach your normal retirement age. Now, in a perfect world, we would all know what our plan was, what we were going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year. But the reality is you may have full and good intentions of staying with an employer, and things change. So one other thing that I did want to talk about, because I get this question a lot, or I hear this comment a lot, and that is, I wish that I hadn't taken that refund when I left my last employer. It would be so nice to have that service credit to my account now. So I hear this in one of two circumstances. A lot of times it's either somebody who was young and they worked for a few years and took their refund when they left, and they never planned to work for a logger's employer again, and just lo and behold they end up re-employing down the road. And hindsight's 20/20. When they're 25 years old, maybe they've got better plans for that money, but when they're 55 and looking at retirement, they really may have wished they had those 4 years of service credit on their benefit calculation. So what happens when you find yourself in this circumstance? We do have something that allows a member to redeposit their contributions if they took a refund. So we're not talking about lump sums here, we're just talking about if you took a refund of your contributions and forfeited your service credits at an earlier date. So if you reemploy with a logger's employer within 10 years, you have this option to redeposit plus any applicable interest, and what that's going to do is reinstate that service credit. So if you had 4 years, you took a refund of your contributions, you can pay that back to loggers and reinstate that 4 years. For some folks, especially those who have come back and earned quite a bit of more service credit, those additional 2, 3, 4 years can make a difference on the final benefit calculation. So this is always an option to keep in mind. Like I mentioned, if you take a lump sum payout of your benefit, that is not something that you can redeposit. Loggers views that as closing your account, you've received your benefit. So at that point, there's no such thing as a redeposit. So again, we're just talking about refunds of contributions. Okay, so I really quickly, before we kind of move on to our next little segment, we've kind of talked about the options of separating prior to employment. We're going to move on and talk about what happens with my benefit after I've retired as far as my options for working again. But I kind of want to just do a recap of everything that we talked about, because there's a lot of different scenarios that go on here. So I've got this slide, and this slide is actually a really good slide. You can print it out and use it kind of as a little cheat sheet, stick in your loggers folder if you ever have somebody who asks questions about this in the future. So just as a really quick recap, if you have less than 5 years of service credit, so non-vested members can do one of two things. They can take a refund if they have contributions in the system, or they can leave their contributions in the system, and what that is doing is preserving the service credit. Again, remember, if you were non-contributory, so your employees were not paying anything in, you cannot take a refund because there's nothing to refund. Employer contributions stay with that employer. So this is only if you're paying in that 4% of your gross wage. If you are vested, so you have at least 5 years of service credit, but you are not age eligible to retire, again, you always have the option to take your refund. You can defer your retirement, meaning you wait until you're age eligible and then you apply for your monthly benefit. Or you can take a lump sum. If you fall into that less than 10 years of service, more than 10 years away from retirement category. Now, I did get a really excellent question about this lump sum that I didn't address earlier. You know, we talked about on the refunds, if you're non-contributory, you're not eligible for a refund. However, if you are non-contributory and you have more than 5 years of service, less than 10 years, and you're more than 10 years away from retirement, so these folks that are eligible for that lump sum, it does not matter if you're contributory or non-contributory. You are eligible for this benefit. And the reason that is because once you become vested, you're guaranteed under law, state law, to have some sort of benefit payable to you. And the lump sum is just an avenue for somebody who's going to have a very minimal monthly benefit payable at the end. It's just an avenue for them to get that money instead of waiting to get those little payments later on down the road. So great question there, but even if you're non-contributory, you would be eligible for that lump sum payment. If you're vested and you're eligible for early retirement, but you're not at normal retirement age yet, again, you can take an early retirement. If you don't want to take the reduction in your benefit, you can delay your retirement. And then again, this one's the easy one. If you're vested and you've reached retirement age, your option is to apply for regular retirement. And I will say that once you have reached a retirement age, you no longer can apply for a refund of your contributions because you can take your monthly benefit instead. Now, I did get the question too, and this is another really good question for my employers that are on the line with me. For employers who are making contributions on behalf of an employee, what happens if they don't become vested and so they're not eligible for a monthly benefit? How long are they basically on the hook for, well, what happens if this person employs down the road? Am I going to have to pay for those first few years of service? And again, if you remember that I mentioned that members do have to employ within 10 years of their date of termination to be eligible for that service. So after they've lapsed a 10-year break in service, basically the obligation at the employer at that point falls away. And so those assets would basically then act like a credit to the employer's account. And it doesn't work quite like that, but in essence, that would be how long the employer is on the hook for those funds. So very, very good question. For the last few minutes here, I kind of wanted to switch gears. We've gone over some of the scenarios that an employee may face leaving prior to retirement. And the second half that we're going to talk about here has to do with once a member is retired and they, for whatever reason, decide to return to work, how does that affect the monthly benefit that they are receiving? So a member can retire from LAGERS, start to draw their benefit, and then go back to work at a later date, and it may or may not affect the monthly benefit that they're receiving. So kind of wanted to talk about a couple of these options as well. So let's say we have a member who retires and they've been retired and they decide they want to go back and work, whether it's for financial reasons, maybe they just want to have something else to do. Doesn't really matter the circumstances behind the return for work. But a retiree can return to work and continue to receive full LAGERS benefits in a couple different situations. The first would be if they were to employ with a non-LAGERS employer. So LAGERS covers, like I said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 660 local government entities across the state of Missouri. So aside from that group of employers, you can go work for any non-LAGERS employer, full-time, part-time, doesn't make a difference. You can start drawing or earning additional benefits through that employer, but as long as they're non-LAGERS, it's not going to affect your monthly benefit in any way. So you can continue to draw your monthly benefit. Another option that a member would have would be to reemploy part-time with any loggers employer. Now again, every loggers employer makes their own set of benefit elections when they join loggers, and one of the things that each employer does individually is it defines what part-time is for loggers purposes. Now I consider, or what full-time is, I consider part-time employment anything less than 40 hours a week. For me, full-time is 40 hours a week or more. And I just want to caution you that the loggers definition of full-time, part-time is very different. Most of our employers, now not all of them, but most of them have elected 1,500 hours annually as their definition for full-time employees. So anybody working less than 1,500 hours would be considered part-time. And that comes out to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 28.5 hours a week. So you would need to make sure you are keeping your hours below that benchmark. Employers also do have the option to elect 1,250 or even 1,000 hours annually, which would be even fewer hours. So if you're wanting to go back on a part-time basis, just keep in mind that you need to talk with that employer about what their definition of full-time, part-time is, because they are required to report all full-time employees. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you are part-time with an employer, you're not earning any additional service credit in the logger system, and you'll continue to receive full benefits. The last option that I want to talk about as far as something a retiree can do and continue to receive full benefits would be to reemploy full-time with a different loggers employer. So keep in mind that a member cannot draw a benefit from the same employer they're earning a benefit from. So if you're drawing a benefit from loggers employer A, you can't also be working for them full-time and earning additional benefits. It's not allowed. However, you can go and work full-time for any other loggers employer that you're not currently drawing a benefit from. Now there are a couple things if you want to do this that an employee needs to be mindful of. The first thing is that loggers does require a full month break in service from their retirement effective date until their new employment starts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that 1 month break works here in just a second. But as long as they've satisfied this 1 month break, so they've retired, they've been retired for at least a month, they can reemploy full-time with any other loggers employer, and they would actually begin to accrue an additional separate benefit. So they're still receiving their first benefit, and now they're accruing a second benefit. It's going to work exactly the same as before. The only difference is the vesting schedule for these employees is actually only going to be 12 months instead of 60 months. So after 1 year of their second employment, they're going to be revested in the system. So you could retire and then down the road go back to work full-time for another loggers employer and only work for 2 or 3 more years and still be eligible for a second benefit, which is pretty cool. Now, I do want to caution you that, like I mentioned here just a second ago, you cannot work full-time for the same employer that you're drawing a benefit from. So sometimes circumstances are just beyond our control, and for whatever reason a retiree may need to go back and work for the same employer that they're drawing a benefit from. In this case, what loggers will do is we will suspend the benefit that they're currently receiving, and then it's going to work basically the same as if they were to have employed with another loggers employer. Again, you have to have a 1 month break in service, and I do just want to point out that loggers defines a 1 month break in service as a minimum calendar month break from employment from either an individual's termination date or retirement effective date, whichever one happens later. So if you are working up until March 24th and that's your termination date, and your retirement effective date is April 1st, we're going to count that 1 month from the later date, so the April 1st date going forward. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That is how we look at this 1 month break in service. And again, you're going to begin to accrue a separate benefit. You're vested after 12 consecutive months of employment. And when you are ready to stop working for the second time, what LAGERS will do is we would reinstate the first benefit along with the second benefit that you had earned in that stint of employment. So there are a surprising number of options available to members who retire and perhaps want to continue working into the future. That is all that I have for you guys today on separating from employment. This can kind of be a complex topic, so we kind of wanted to keep it high level. If you have any more questions, I know I've got one or two here that I'm going to get with you individually here shortly and follow up with you on. But I hope everybody kind of gained a little bit today as far as of what the different options are. And just keep in mind that it's always better when you're separating from employment. If you have questions about what my options are, always feel free to call our office. You can always visit us online today. I know I mentioned if you are interested in applying for refunds or lump sums or even applying for your retirement benefits, you can do that online. If you get onto our website, www.molagers.org, you can click on this button down here, the Member Access, and that'll bring up a box that looks like this. This is our MyLagers login. If you've never been onto MyLagers before, this is a really neat tool that we have for our members now. If you've never been on, click this Enroll Now button and you can set up an account. But what you can do on MyLagers is you can look at your accounts. You can see all your service credit. I have found in the past I've run into folks who maybe worked for a LAGERS employer in the past and maybe forgot or didn't realize they were LAGERS members, and they come back into the system at a later date, and there's a few years of service credit hanging out there that they're eligible for. And so those are always kind of cool to figure out. So you can get on there and see all the employment that's been reported to us. Again, you can apply for those refunds on there if that's something you want to do. Apply for your retirement benefits, create benefit estimates, all that good stuff. So there's a lot out here. I would encourage everybody, if you haven't, tell your coworkers. This is something great to get on and do as well. And I thank you for joining me this afternoon. For those of you who still have a few questions, I'm going to hang on the line here and kind of chat back with a few of you to get your questions answered. But again, I appreciate everybody stopping by today, and have a good afternoon.